morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Miles Prodan, for those whom I don't know, but I'm pretty sure I know everyone in the room. I'm the president and CEO of the BC Wine Institute. It's our pleasure to put on this panel discussion. You'll note there's no wine being served at a BCWI tasting event, so but there's lots of that to have happen this afternoon and throughout the day. So it's really just an opportunity recognizing that we've got some literally world-class wine experts here in Vancouver and here in this room right now, and we thought to take advantage of wineries that are in town for our event to have this sort of thing. This is really just for the BC wine industry to get a perspective, and so that's the purpose of it. And I'm going to now turn it over to Barb Philip and to introduce the panel and to get into it. So again, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Miles. Welcome, everybody. It is really nice to have this opportunity to, I hope, have a frank, exciting discussion. And we see each other a lot through tastings and other events in the year, and we certainly see enough of each other, the panel and myself. But to have a formal structure where we can talk about the future of BC wine and what going forward is going to be our point of difference or our signature, or if that's even important. And I wanted to say just before we begin too that this event, of course, is sponsored by the BC Wine Institute, but really BCWI's role here is to facilitate the discussion. So we're not writing policy or mandates here. You can take what you want from the discussion, you can leave what you don't like behind, what you don't think will work for you, but it really is just a free discussion about possibilities and impressions. And you have the opportunity to ask questions of, as Miles says, is really an international expert panel. So I think if there's one thing that the panel and myself have in common is that we work in wine, of course, full-time, up to our ears. A lot of that takes our focus and takes us physically internationally to travel, to taste widely, to educate. But I think we all share a great passion and a great interest for our local wines, for BC wines. I'm going to introduce the panel. I have some questions that I've prepared for them that are specific to their expertise. I'm going to let them talk a couple of minutes about the answers to those questions. And then what I'd like to do, we have a small group, is just really open it up to dialogue. So nothing, I would say, nothing is off limits. I would normally say what happens in this room stays in this room, but that's not actually the truth today. It's all being videoed and will be shared with the rest of the members from the BCWI. But again, this is not official, right? This is a discussion and a discovery. So let's look at our expert panel. We have Rhys Pender, Master of Wine. Many of you know him. And I think what Rhys really brings today is the perspective of a producer. Of course, he's producer of Little Farm Winery in the Sommelier, but also as an educator and as an international journalist and judge. Kurtis Kolt, journalist and key influencer here in the local Vancouver market. Certainly one, if not the top key influencer in this market, mainly through the Georgia Strait, but also through other publications. And key also, he's the founder of Top Drop, a fast-growing, dynamic wine festival that is operating now in BC, but also recently expanded to Alberta. So I'm going to be asking you some questions about that as well. DJ Kearney, international wine educator, trained hundreds of trade professionals in Canada and the United States. She's also a writer, judge, and has worked for many regional wine bodies around the world. She also is the brainchild with Stephen Spurrier behind the Judgment of BC. And we'll be looking, I think we should talk about that a little bit because we're all going to be together tomorrow morning tasting BC wines blind and deciding which ones are going to represent BC in the next Judgment of BC. What are the criteria that we use for that? I don't know. We can discuss it. Michaela Morris, international journalist, regular contributor to Decanter magazine. You all know it. It's the best wine magazine in the world. And also for the top business trade magazine in the world, Minagers. Janet Dorozynski, based in Ottawa, Trade Commissioner for Wine, Beer, and Spirits. Her job is to promote Canadian wine around the world. She promotes it to international trade, to international diplomats, through trade tastings, but also by bringing people, trade professionals, sommeliers, to Canada, touring them around. So we have lots of good questions for you, Janet. Let's begin with the questions. I think there's no doubt that we've proven through blind tastings, through talking to people around the world, that we make world-class wines. And when we compare them, grape variety to grape variety, style to style, they stand up. We've proven that ourselves time and time again. But moving forward, what will it be, instead of comparing necessarily to another region or somebody else who is famous for doing a grape variety, what will it be that we do when people think of British Columbia wines? What do they think of? What do they crave? Rhys Pender, you have an interesting perspective. As you produce wine, but you also taste wine widely internationally. What has surprised you most about what consumers get about BC wines, or what they don't get about BC wines, when you take it from the production point of view to the consumer point of view? What are some of the biggest connects and disconnects?
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming along. Can you hear okay with that? So I'm pretty excited to hear what everyone has to say. I think we're very lucky to have this group and get such a great perspective. So I think it's something we need. So yeah. So on this question, I think, I like what you said in the intro about world class, and that, yes, our wines can stand up and they do fit in there. And I don't think 10 years ago we were even talking about that. So that's a pretty amazing change right there, right? But I think within that, from the consumer perspective, we get a lot of confusion, I would say, because, basically what we give them is what we are as an industry. And I think we kind of get a little bit stuck on this mix between what sells easily and what is our best wines we can make, right? And as a business, we all know you need to sell wine to stay in the business and keep things going. But there's a cost to that, right? I think you basically, you feed these kind of problems, you feed these kind of stereotypes, and we become that eventually, right? And so we've become this sort of mishmash of all different grapes and styles and wines, and with no real focus. And so from an international perspective, when consumers come in, or when we have international trade and media come in, they're like, oh, what do you do best here? And well, it's like, this is a little, how long do you have, right? And so I think we get a lot of confusion about that. And but I think what we really need to do is try to kind of focus on thinking about what are our best wines, and not just like what can we sell the most of right now, but what are the best quality wines, because you really have to look at it from a long-term perspective as an industry. And from a, if you want to be in business for a long time, it's going to be by having the best wines, and those are the ones that will sell, right? And I think that's going to start to happen. We're getting things like the new GIs in place and sub-GIs, which will allow focus on certain varieties in certain regions and those reputations to kind of develop. But I think right now we're kind of stuck in this little bit of a short-term approach of just giving the consumers what we think they want, whereas they're just going to want what we give them, right? So it just goes round and round. So I think we need to kind of step back a little bit, figure out what are our best style of wines, grape varieties, how do we make those? And it's not something we need to just kind of rip everything out and replant in one day, right? It should be a slow, gradual process to first realizing what's best, and then changing, I don't know, maybe your business a couple of % every year towards that. So over 20, 30, 40 years, we're now making what we do best. And so I think that's, when, in my experience, talking to consumers, it's they're really, really open-minded, right? They want to try, they want to know, what we do best and why, and they're open-minded to hearing, the different styles and how they work, and or what doesn't work. But if we just keep telling them one thing, that's what they'll believe, right? So I think they're really very open-minded and will like whatever we give them, but we should be giving them the best things we have. Things like top drop. I know Kurtis is going to talk about that, but I think it's great, like that's focused just on interesting wines that fit certain criteria, not just, oh, who has the biggest marketing budget and the flashiest ads and everything. It's like all about the wines, and you've seen the success of that, right? So I think, you know, the same with trade and consumers, they will gravitate to the best once they realize what that is, and we can make that clear to them. Yeah, how do we find out what are our best grapes? Well, that's kind of I think a little bit more of a challenge, right? And you know, it's going to be different in Lake Country than it is in Osoyoos and in the Fraser Valley and on the island. And I think, you know, creating these sub-regions that are starting to take place is the first step in that. We can sort of draw a line in the sand, see what works well there, build a reputation for that. And then, you know, my guess is over 10, 20 years, people will, if you've got one grape variety in a sub-region and the other ones are selling for twice as much, you're going to replant to that grape variety that sells for twice as much, right? And that's going to be this logical, slow approach as how we change, but it'll all be based on quality focus and the best grape in the best place, making the best wine, and consumers will eat that up, I think. So I don't know, does that kind of answer your question?
I think that's great, and what a great way to begin. And certainly I've got about 10 follow-up questions that I've jotted down, so I'm sure you do in your minds as well. Let's hear what Kurtis has to say. Kurtis, you're very connected to the local market, as we talked about. Are there themes that have emerged from your readers? Is there a call for more reviews or informations about particular styles or particular grape varieties?
You know, I look at this from a few points of view. For those I don't know, my background in Vancouver is actually running restaurants and being wine director at many of them. And in the last 10 years, I've been still consulting with some restaurants and various other things, along with writing my column in the Georgia Strait and other outlets as well. I come from a time in my career where it's gone now, but Aurora Bistro, when we opened up on Main Street in 2003, I assembled the first 100% BC wine program in Vancouver. So this is just 15 years ago, and the pushback on that was pretty significant. There was a few times during the week, every week without fail, that we would have people coming from the west side, people coming from, you know, quite far, Friday night, reservations, 7:30, you know, they hear Jeff Van Giest's food, all these wonderful things. They would sit down, see the wine, and oh, can I actually see the rest of the wine list? Actually, it's 100% BC, blah, 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 and they would actually get up and leave. I cannot imagine that happening in our market now, and this is really just 15 years ago. So it kind of shows you leaps and bounds. I think also it shows how far our wines have come, and also where the market has come in reaction to them. As far as what people are looking for, you know, I do get the odd feedback on, especially my column. I get a lot of people emailing me saying, oh, you know what you should tell readers about, because they've enjoyed wines from certain places. I think value is still the #1 thing people are looking for, regardless of style. And I think that we're seeing it. I'm seeing less grumbling about price points of BC wine. You know, I think that when we went through the economic turmoil of 2008, you know, I saw constant climbing up until 2008 of price points kind of across the board. And of course, restaurants in many industries, everyone kind of hit the brakes on that and really want to show value, and that steady growth kind of slowed in price points. And I think that was really good, because I think that the market has kind of caught up to them, and we're now seeing some phenomenal wines in that $20 to $25 price point that really match with those from around the world that are maybe even a little bit more expensive. You know, I have produced, along with Rhys and DJ, and you know, I think everyone here, blind tastings of BC versus the world, and we certainly don't dumb down the competition. And it's incredible to see how valuable the value of our wines that we are showing. And so I think we've got away from that, oh, BC, yeah, they can do whites well, but reds is still not there. You don't really hear that anymore. People are seeing value, and they're not as, I guess, distracted by that. I also see people are fiercely brand conscious, particularly because our region is so close. So people are visiting, and I cannot tell you, for those of you that have tasting rooms, how much that resonates with people, and how much it does for years, that people will follow, and anything you put out there, they will stick to. Which is also very important when people have a negative experience. I know when I've had negative experiences anywhere in the world, they stay with me, and I still tell people to this day if I've had a particularly awful one. So you have that brand conscious nature that people will be wide open to whatever you are making if they've had a great experience with your winery, or experience it in another way. I find that people are generally open to all varieties. I think something that has made our market here quite savvy is that we do have a local wine industry, and that has exposed a lot of people to wine that maybe they wouldn't have if they didn't have such a successful wine industry in their own backyard. So they are adventurous and willing to try new things, and especially obscure varieties for this region. Things like Dolcetto and Arnase, things. I'm making Larry at Stag's Hollow and Chris at Mooncurse are particularly happy in saying this, that people are, they're wide open. And I think that something worth recognizing is that for so many people in the local market, their first Gruner Veltliner, their first Arnase, their first Chenin Blanc is very likely for a lot of people to be British Columbian ones. It's not like they're going to Austria and getting Gruner. For a lot of people, it's gonna be Don's at Comina, and then they like the variety, they follow it up, and then they might go international. So it's kind of another way of looking at it. We all are surrounded by so many wine savvy people that we kind of think that it's the logical way that they're going to find it in the old world and then come here. But then some people have their standards. People, no matter what the quality was, went to Cabernet Sauvignon because they like Cabernet Sauvignon, and they found some good ones. And that's a variety that we had to wait for the quality to kind of come to those people, because the Cabernet Sauvignons, I think in general about 20 years ago, we can definitely say, are not where they are now. We've learned viticulturally how to treat them, climate change has affected that, and so on. The final point that I want to make is one of the things that I do is I consult with Superstore, and in the grocery stores where they have BC wine sections, I have a small army of people, very savvy wine sommeliers and so on, who are in those sections in the weekend to be just a presence on the floor to answer questions and that sort of thing. To wrap my head around this gig, I did it for a couple of months on weekend shifts at the South Surrey Superstore, which was the first in this market to do it. And man, does that ever take you out of your bubble when I'm with readers, how important is organic? And okay, I mentioned natural wine six weeks ago. Can I speak to it again? And are they going to like the Dolcetto that's local and everything? And then I go there, and 80% of the people that are in there just want to know, is this sweet or dry? And looking at the cell, and I forget how much people are so stuck on that, and a lot of from your tasting room, but that's such an important thing where back labels can be handy with that, your marketing of wines, these are the people that are also the engine of our wine industry. These are the majority of people doing the buying, and they will pay for things, but they're definitely still wrapping their head around styles and where we are going as an industry.
Many, many great points. It's hard to not talk.
I can see the discussion building that we're going to have.
I hope everyone is taking either mental notes or physical notes as I am. DJ, you have the opportunity to train consumers and wine trade professionals alike, usually in the context of international wines, or the so-called classic wines. What are the similarities and differences in the way that trade view BC wines, or as Kurtis has talked so eloquently about, the way the non-trade view BC wines?
Yes, that is a really important starting point, and the differences really need to be recognized, understood, and addressed for us to go forward. So just a little context first. For over 15 years, I've been taking BC wine with me when I teach. For over 10 years, for about 13 years, I taught in the US every week, flying to 4 to 5 different cities, like Barbara. And I would always take BC wines with me and put them blind into flights with for my sommelier students. And they had no idea there was a BC wine in there, and you know, 1998, 1997 bubbles, early vintages of Chardonnay and Cabernet Franc and Merlot and Syrah from BC. And I always was fascinated with the reaction. They always thought they were special and often old world. I've taken Syrah and Merlot to Washington State Wines to Taste Washington in panels with very, very serious American wines, and they've always shown very well. I took the BC's first Zinfandel to a ZAP conference, and that was tasted blind with a bunch of old vine, serious, high-end, expensive, much admired, high-scoring Zinfandels, and that was very interesting. I was part of BCWI's initiative to show BC wines in Whole Foods markets in a couple of important cities along the West Coast. And then I went back one day because I'm always in Washington or Oregon, and I stood for an hour by the BC wine shelf in Whole Foods, watching what consumers were doing, coming up to see wines that went from Saint Hubertus Pinot Blanc to Nota Bene. And what was their reaction, and what were they buying, and did they have any questions, and listening to what they said. So, you know, I've, along with things that Rhys and Kurtis do, putting BC wines in front of trade all the time, and then consumers as well, right? Running BC seminars where consumers throng to them because they want to know more. So let me address the trade first. What the trade wants first and foremost is differentiation. They want a point of difference. They want a different style. They want to understand it. They want to present it. They want something that is distinctly BC in a way that they understand and they can communicate to guests in restaurants or on the shelf. So that point of difference really matters. Wines with a voice, wines with a stamp of terroir, wines with a sense of place, wines that show, you know, sub-regional identity. And to me, that's the greatest contrast with the consumer, because the consumer is less concerned with that so far. And I think it's going to have to be a big discussion about how much that matters. Can we have parallel universes where we have consumers who know and care about these points of difference, and then ones who will always just want to support BC wines without thinking too deeply or ponderously about what that wine is telling them, right? It's delicious, it's well priced, I'm buying it. So trade really, really caring and being, you know, owners and custodians and stewards and gatekeepers and tastemakers of the points of difference in BC wines. I think trade also want to champion certain grape varieties. I think Syrah and Cabernet Franc and Riesling and a few of the things that we know really show, they're more transparent, they show a sense of place in a certain way. Off the puck grape varieties, Petit Milot, what else? Touriga Nacional, yeah. Just things that are unusual, outside the box. I think especially the sommelier trade always want to be showing you something different, something a little geeky, something a little extreme. And I think consumers are less concerned about that, right? They are curious, and Kurtis has experienced that, and I sure do through New District and through the wine club and the grapes that people love to discover, the new wines. But essentially, you know, consumers want something that's more familiar. They're very comfortable with Cabernet and Pinot and Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, and especially Pinot Gris here in BC. I'm also very aware, and I think this is an important point to make, is that consumers know good wine. Consumers can really taste well. When I was running the Vancouver Magazine Wine Awards for years, almost everybody here has been a panelist for forever on there. And what I would say to the judges is, don't think for a moment that you are any better than a consumer. Right? If I put consumers in your seats, they would choose the good wines too. And it's important to remember that. When they confront a delicious, well-made, well-balanced, tasty, tasty wine, they know it, and they will drink it more and more. Okay, well, my other points of difference. For the trade, image. That can be brand image, that can be the way a bottle looks, the way it feels. Is it a wine that's going to be on a dining room table? Is it going to look good there? Do I want that to represent me and my brand and my restaurant and all the stakeholders? How does it look? How does it feel? And consumers are very label conscious as well, and I think this is part of, should be part of our bigger discussion, not just the quality of the wine, but how are we actually presenting it to people. We have, I know there's wines that just absolutely fly off shelves in wine stores because they are really attractive, compelling, cheeky labels, and consumers just eat them up. They love them. It's part of the story of the wine. And yet, there's not a chance that that wine will be on the table of a fine dining restaurant at all. The trade cares much more about how the wine is made and how it's farmed. And what's the backstory in terms of sustainability, organic, biodynamic? What are the points of difference again in the winemaking and the farming in particular? Consumers, that's probably the last question they ask of you in a wine store or at a tasting is, can you tell me the biodynamic preparations that are used in this, or is this farmed responsibly? What is similar? Trade and consumers both like a story, right? Wine, the people who make the wine, why they made it, what it means to them, what it represents of the farming and the region and the grapes. Consumers love to hear those stories, and I've learned that so intimately through New District and through the Wine Club, where I write lengthy notes about each of the wines, and not what it tastes like, but about the winemakers and their dogs and their love stories and how they got into wine. People remember those things and they tell them at their dinner parties. They don't care about the residual sugar and the alcohol level and the pH and the Francois Frere barrel. That's not what they remember and take away and want to tell us the story of the wine. And the trade loves a story as well. That's what's going to sell that wine tableside in the 30 seconds that you have. So the story matters enormously. And it's a big part of our future as well, telling our story. I don't know if I've gone over my 5 minutes. I timed Kurtis, but not myself. Because we both love to gab a lot. Style, yes. The trade really is interested in promoting a style, understanding a style, advocating a style, and wines that are, I think, a little more transparent, allow room for food, and more of that narrative. And, consumers often want to be overwhelmed by a lot of flavor and taste. I was tasting a very, very delicate, ethereal, transparent, lighter than air Syrah a few days ago, made in the Okanagan. No wood, all concrete. And when consumers come in to that tasting bar, they are messed up by that wine. Syrah, I thought it was going to have flavor and tannins and weight and richness. This is not what I expected at all. So I think style matters a lot in the consumer's expectations of what they're going to get from BC. We know it's a desert-ish. We know it's a cool climate-ish region. The average consumer is often expecting a lot of intensity, a lot of potency, a lot of power, and that's not necessarily the wines that we are going to market with now as we tell our international story.
Thank you, DJ. Lots of great insight. Michaela? Again, I hope you're taking good notes. I've got a page full. Michaela, we think of you as Italian wine expert, and in fact you are. one of the world's greatest Italian wine experts. But we forget sometimes that you do travel to other places and your interests go not only to BC, but all around the world. And you've recently been in Argentina, and we're in Patagonia for the first time. And you mentioned that it sort of reminded you of BC a little bit in the olden days, or when it was emerging. What are some of your impressions there, and how did you think it was like BC?
Yeah, and I think it's just that I drew some parallels, and it really made me think about our BC wine industry, because I do travel a lot, and people sometimes still ask me if I live here. Anymore, and I really do. I really do. I have an address here. I do laundry here, and I pay taxes here, and I love it here. And I always love coming home. And when I am abroad, I love talking about where I'm from, and because I'm in the wine industry, I talk a lot about our wines as well, but I also think a lot about our industry. And for me, it's been incredible, like everyone here on the panel, to have been in this wine industry for so long and to have witnessed and tasted the progression and the evolution. And I get a bit teary sometimes, like Barb, about seeing where we've come. But I'm also thinking about how we, and I say we because I include myself in this, very much in this industry, how we can do better. So I don't want to diss Patagonia at all, but I do want to give my impression of it because it made me think about what someone could have as an impression coming here. And I'm speaking from a journalist's point of view. So we've talked a lot about consumers, and I think this is so incredibly important. But when I think of Patagonia, when I hear of Patagonia, I think penguins and glacier lakes, etc. To me, there's something exotic about it. And it's the furthest south in Argentina where they're making wine. So I feel like there's got to be something distinct about it. And because I travel abroad to many places, mostly Italy, when I tell people that I'm from British Columbia and that we make wine here, they're surprised, and they think igloos, they think Eskimos, or whatever they think, and they think, wow, you actually make wine there? And so it's a surprise for them. So I feel with both regions, there's something somewhat exotic about it, something surprising, and because of that, there's an intrigue. So right away, we have something to draw people in to our region because they want to learn about it. They don't get to try these wines very often. So it's really important, I think, first and foremost, when you have this incredibly unique wine region, to have a very strong message. And I do believe that with wines of Argentina, they had strong messaging around what Patagonia is. I also believe that overall, we've done a pretty good job with the BC Wine Institute and yourselves to give this sort of message about what British Columbia is. But on top of that, the wines have to deliver that message, because a message is nothing if the wines aren't delivering that. And I was a little bit surprised with my first few tastings in Patagonia, because I felt like, as strong as the messaging was, the wines weren't actually capturing that. And so to me, is it a false message? And again, this is something that stays within the room. And we went further and we tasted other wines and dug a little bit deeper into it. But if that's my first impression, that the message that's being delivered is not necessarily what's in the glass, that's an even stronger statement. So I think that's really key. The wines have to deliver whatever message we give, and I think we can give a strong message, and I do think that we have wines that deliver that. We have to show those wines to the journalists and to the consumers and in our tastings as well, but definitely when people are coming to British Columbia from abroad, or if we're showing our wines abroad, these are indeed the wines that we have to put forward. And I think that speaks to Rhys's point about putting our best wines forward. Even if we're making wines from many different grape varieties, often if you choose your wines well, you can see a through line in them that will speak to a very distinct place, which also DJ was talking about. So I think we have to be very, very conscious of this when we're presenting our wines outside of British Columbia or bringing people in. The other thing too is the focus at each and every individual winery. you might not all be working with the same grape varieties. You might be working in different parts of our different wine regions. So perhaps a Pinot Noir is not going to work in where you are. Maybe Cabernet Franc or whatever it is works better. But I think having focus is really key, because the other thing that I was very aware of, again, just making this parallel with Patagonia, was wineries who are making 50 different SKUs. So not just 50 different grape varieties, yes, a lot of different grape varieties, but then at so many different price points and so many different iterations. And to me, I didn't find, certainly not all of those SKUs were fantastic. There were far too many that weren't. And maybe one or two wines stood out. So why not focus a little bit more on what is working best at your winery? So I think the focus is really key. And then finally, again, thinking of Patagonia, and this is something I think that they are aware of there, is not to compete at the bottom end. I think Kurtis made a great point about how these wines that are coming out at $20 to $25, and they're delivering great value for that, and we can put them against wines around the world, but not competing at the very low end. We know we can't do that. And that was something that also I took away from Patagonia as well, to make that parallel. Was that my time? Was that the
That was the timer I was supposed to put on myself.
I don't know if do you want me to speak to Italy really quickly, or do you want to wait?
Why don't we save Italy, because
Okay.
I think I'm bursting,
Okay.
and I want to keep with the theme of the international message. And Janet, you have so much experience sending out that message for Canada, yes, in general, but also specifically for British Columbia, both here bringing people in and abroad. What sort of comments do you get when you pour at international trade tastings or host a sommelier fam trip here? And are there particular styles of varietals people are expecting, hoping to see when they get here? What are their first impressions, and then what do they leave with? Does that change?
Yes, thanks for inviting me, BCWI and Barb and esteemed panelists. Yes, I've been working in the international realm for quite some time now, and part of what I do is, as Barb said, send our wine abroad, work to bring people here. And in terms of expectations of the trade that we work with, I don't mean to, and I know BC wine is well received in the market, and that's great, but, and I'm sure my fellow panelists would agree and have mentioned it already, that most people still don't know that Canada makes wine, that BC makes wine. If they know we make wine, they know we make ice wine. So they don't really have any preconceived notions, negative or positive, when we put wine in front of them. They're always very pleasantly surprised when they taste BC wine. They taste a purity of fruit and a lot of interesting grape varieties, which I'm going to speak about a bit. But one of the things that trade have often said to us is, and it's been mentioned already, that's the damn thing about coming last in a lineup, that they don't really understand what BC wine is and what the story is. And I know it's often, part of the story is that, you know, we make everything well and we grow 80 different grape varieties, but you know, people look at that and think, well, if I went to a restaurant that advertises that they made or served 80 different kinds of cuisines, people usually don't want to go to that kind of restaurant because they're not really sure what they're going to get, and they're not really sure what is the best thing from that restaurant. So I think when we go out with a message, we have to be a bit focused in terms of what we're putting in front of people. And that's not to say, and it's been mentioned before, that we have to rip out grape varieties or we can't have diversity, because diversity is very important for the local market. But we have to have a story and we have to have focus when we go out internationally, because it's very confusing to trade who have never tasted a BC wine to taste many different things. So I don't work only with BC Wine. I work with Ontario and Nova Scotia, and just as a point of comparison, Ontario has been very focused over the past 10 years and has drilled down to say that we have 4 or 5 key grape varieties that they show both domestically, but they also only show those wines internationally: Chardonnay, Riesling, Cab Franc, Pinot Noir, and Gamay. They're starting to focus more and more on sparkling wine as a style, which I think is also something that BC can do. And when we've put sparkling wine in front of international trade, or when they've tasted it here, they also recognize that there's something special because we are a coolish climate and have the conditions for sparkling wine as well as other cool climate grape varieties. Similarly, Nova Scotia, they're very much about selling their sparkling wine story internationally, even though we know that, or for those of you who may or may not know, but they've created a white wine, a white appellation wine called Tidal Bay, which is a blend, an assemblage of, can be up to 13 or 11 different grape varieties. But it's very much pitched to the domestic market, and they realize that as interesting as it might be for the domestic market, sparkling wine is what they're going to hang their hat on. It's also a wine that they're going to get more money for, and this has been mentioned previously as well, that when you go out internationally, you can't, BC wines, Canadian wines can't compete on price point. We're not large volume, we're not low price point, so we can't play in that arena. So we have to portray ourselves as something special with the styles and the grape varieties that we do. I guess I wrote down a few things that I've heard from buyers and trade when we've been out in the marketplace. And I guess, you know, again, it relates back to this whole idea of having a story, and what is the story, and what is the narrative for BC? What is the narrative for your winery if you want to compete in the international marketplace? You can't just say to trade that, you know, we do everything well, or my winery does everything well, because every winery in the world says that. So you really have to have the story, the narrative, especially because there are wines that are expensive wines, high value wines, and they're not going to be sold at supermarkets or, you know, large, whatever, liquor distribution outlets like we have in Canada. They're wines that are going to be sold at restaurants and sold in small shops. So the people who are selling them, who are hand selling your wines, really need to know what your message is and the message for that grape variety that you're trying to sell. I've heard a lot over the past decade. We started bringing in my department and working with the wine associations here and across the country, bringing in trade and media from basically a few key markets throughout the world: the UK, the US, China. And I've heard many times over and over that less is more. Most of the trade that have come to British Columbia and taste a range of wines at a winery are often more impressed with your entry-level or estate wines that have less oak, less stuff, because again, it goes back to the point I said about tasting the purity of the fruit. They recognize that there's really something special here, and often the higher priced wines, which have more oak, which have more manipulation, are the ones that they feel are less interesting for them because they don't see that story. And these wines, the higher priced wines, reserve wines, whatever we want to call them, they could be from anywhere, whereas the estate wines that are pure, they really get that sense of BC and that place. So that I found was a very interesting point that was being made. With respect to, we haven't really talked about it, but grape varieties, or, well, I've mentioned it, but I know the discussion in BC sometimes it's very binary. It's like, you know, we need to have one grape variety or we focus on diversity. I think that's a bit of a simplistic way of looking at it. And it goes back to what I was saying about Ontario and Nova Scotia, that it's not 1 or 80. I think we have to sort of come to a place where when we're promoting internationally, and some of the grape varieties have already been mentioned for BC, it is similar to what Ontario is hanging their hat on, Riesling, Chardonnay, Syrah, a few others, Pinot Noir, sparkling as well. So it's, I guess that's the point I would make, is that no one is expecting BC just to have one grape variety, but I think to have a bit more focus is probably a good thing. Lastly, just recently, we had a tasting at Canada House in the UK, and some of you were there at the tasting. And we did send out a survey to the participants. We had over 200 trade and media show up. And overall, I think people are pleasantly surprised. Again, it goes back to this thing that for most trade, they will have not tasted BC wine ever before, because it's not widely available internationally. So when they do taste it, they're pleasantly surprised. But I'm just going to read you a few of the comments, specifically what trade had to say. And the first is from Matthew Jukes, who's the wine writer for the Daily Mail and has his own website. And he said, "It's easy to tell which wineries have traveled the world, as they are making wines more appropriate to the UK market, a lighter style with less oak." So I think, you know, if you are interested in taking your wine internationally, you need to find out what that marketplace is looking for. And we've seen in the case of the UK, it's not a market that is a big fan of, you know, heavily oaked wines or bolder reds. So that's the kind of market that you probably want to take your lighter or less oaked Chardonnays and Riesling and Pinot and whatever. So it's you know, the message of what you want to do internationally, you have to be very conscious of what the market will bear, both in terms of the kind of wine and the price point. Another person who's an MW, not Rhys, or Barb, and I won't name him, but he was quite direct in his comments, and he said, some great wines here, but also some awful ones. Perhaps there should be a pre-tasting event, so those producers who are not suited to the market won't have to submit themselves to a difficult market. Again, that's something that can be discussed. I mean, it's, you know, there was a time when we were doing events at Canada House, when we started doing them in 2010, where we did have a pre-screening. There's pros and cons to that. I think maybe a pre-screening is good when you want to have a curated message, but I think there are other ways to have a curated message. You can work with the trade locally in your own province or in Canada, who really have their pulse on sort of what is happening internationally and what is good. Yeah, I guess maybe I will just stop there because I'm probably running out of time.
No, in fact, that's perfect. And that's why you hire panelists like this. Comments that are insightful, intelligent, relevant, and spot on time. Well done. So many questions in my mind, and a couple of different strong themes, I think, even though each of the panelists was speaking to something different. Certainly for me, there are a couple of things I would take away. I wanted to just make a comment of moving on, the panelists addressed it, but just so you know, when we talk about perhaps focusing in order to tell a stronger message on a select group of grape varieties or a certain style, it's not because the other ones don't have value or aren't relevant or are even not as good. We're interested in the wines that are the most unique, the most BC, the ones that, we have a chance to taste widely all around the world. We want to drink something from BC that we can't get anywhere else. We want to take that with us when we travel to show people, you know what? You can't get this anywhere in France, anywhere in Italy, anywhere in the so-called New World. So, any questions right now that you're bursting with? All right. Then, I've got several here, so maybe I'll start sort of broad. Do you think, and I'm going to put this out to the room, panelists and producers, do you think it's possible to have the same message for our local consumers, the ones that come into the tasting rooms, the ones so these would be consumers and trade buyers alike. Can we tell them the same message as we tell our international consumers? Or is that a different message? I think Kurtis was talking about how important it is, the PR, when somebody comes into your tasting room. That's still how a lot of our business is done, right? You have a customer for life if they have a great experience when they come in and they taste. We can't do that for our international potential buyers. So is it a different message? Is there one that shows more diversity for our local market, and then is there one that's more pointed and focused for the international market?
And I think when we're addressing the international market, we have to do that with our best foot forward, with the best varietals we can, and apropos what you were saying, Rhys, but when we do it locally, I don't think that's the message that needs to be delivered. It needs to be more what DJ was talking about how we farm and that sort of thing. Anyway, that's my
Okay,
personal
very
opinion.
interesting. So did everybody hear that so the answer to my question would be no, there are two different messages.
I think uniting those messages at some point on some level is going to be very important for where we go next. We're value added is a very, very big part of what we do. Consumers, hello? Oh, okay, this is a question for after. Okay, I'm just going to make a very quick one. Is that, yes, there are two distinct messages that are needed now, I believe. But, my point that consumers are really good tasters, they know good wine, they're curious, especially here in BC where we touchingly, lovingly, enthusiastically support BC wines, and smart consumers, smart wine lovers will absolutely relish that message when we are ready for it and they are ready for it. So there will have to be a point where the circles overlap. But for now, I think, along with you, that they need to be very, very different.
I think you can still kind of have, this is what we kill it with as an industry, but we also do super fun stuff for you guys who come to visit us locally, and it's only available here in small amounts, and it's kind of the fun, I think that's pretty easy to do that kind of message.
Okay. I'm glad you had it. Or in the back, thanks.
I was going to ask, so with the proliferation of all these small wineries that are coming up in British Columbia, I'm curious to know if your thoughts are that it's a hindrance to creating a concerted message both domestically and internationally, or whether it's an advantage in building it, and then maybe speak to the fact that a lot of these wineries that are popping up are very small, and so we're not worried about the international market because we don't have the capability to produce enough product to ship that way. We're just worried about paying our bills here in British Columbia, and if there's a way to sort of reconcile those two things, where the direction the industry is going, if we're getting big enough where we'll start to see more of that internationally, or if we should still be just focusing on our domestic market, which we own so little of currently anyway.
I have a quick comment on that, and it's interesting to see many, many small wineries, the producer of one of them sitting on the panel, in fact, who actually have made it part of their marketing strategy to get placements on international wine lists, to get international reviewers to look at the wines. And whether that's to sell more in the domestic market, or just to sort of test the international market to see how the wines really stand up? I don't know, but I'm not sure that a small winery necessarily precludes wanting to be visible to some degree in the international market. We probably won't see a little farm on the Tesco shelves soon, but we might see it on on great wine lists in London or New York.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I think that there's small wineries in all wine regions, and I think they're just as important as the large ones, and vice versa. So I don't think that, I mean, I guess I always believe that you have the biggest vision possible. If you're selling most of your wine here, but I don't think there's such a big difference between our consumers and the consumers in other places. They want good wine. They want to get good value for what they're paying for their wines as well. So I think it is important to think globally, even if you're selling more locally, and to believe that you're just as important as the big wineries. And I think what's really key, and this is something that I was going to say just thinking of my experience with some of the Italian regions, is you need to work together, the big and the small, to deliver that message. Because really, whether it's your wine or someone else's wine on the international stage that gets the accolades, it's that old expression: a high tide rises all boats.
The halo effect.
Right? Exactly. And the world is small. You might not be shipping abroad, but we have people coming to visit. Right? And people are going to visit might be visiting your wine region if there is some international recognition for it too.
I'd like to add to that as well, because I mean, I work with the wineries who are exporting, and it may surprise you to know that not all of them are 75,000 case wineries. We have quite a few wineries that produce 3,000, 5,000 cases, and to Michaela's point, I mean, there are wineries all over the world who are super small and exporting, and that's usually the first thing I ask a winery when I travel and go in. And it was a while ago, but when I was in New Zealand, most of the wineries there that I visited were 5,000 or less case production wineries. Most of them were exporting. They had to. They have a smaller market, of course, than Canada does, than BC does. But they're exporting because they want to be on a world stage. Not everyone can come to your region to taste your wine. So if you want to be known, and again, it's your own personal business decision and strategy. But if you want your wine to be known, a good way to get it known is to export, to get it on a wine list at the Savoy in London, to get it on the wine list at Gordon Ramsay. I mean, a recent example with Benjamin Bridge sparkling wine, the 2010 Brut. It's on the wine list at Gordon Ramsay. And, press release, he picked the wine, which of course is bullshit. But anyway, I mean, it's, you export for the domestic play, right? So you can say that my wine is at Gordon Ramsay, and then it may resonate with consumers here who might not have wanted to try your wine. So, and again, it's, when you export, it's not either export or domestic focus. Most wineries in the world who export allocate 10%, 20%, whatever. Again, it's up to you to decide, and again, personal business decision, but it's about recognition. It's about the validation from the international wine community, and about getting sales internationally. Then your wine is really world class if it's selling in the world, I think.
Can I just add on that too? I think the small wineries are often the ones who are driving that quality message too, because they're often selling their wine at a higher price point. They can focus on quality. They can, they probably farm more of their own vineyards. They can focus on the terroir, showing that in the wine. And I think we sometimes forget, but to me, there's kind of two different markets of wine. There's is it red, is it white, is it sweet, is it dry? $20 maximum limit, through the supermarkets or whatever. And then there's the people who are much more engaged and interested and looking for different regions around the world and a focus on quality. And you can't be both. That's another message I think we have to remember. You cannot be the McDonald's and the Hawksworth at the same time, right? You've got to choose one and be in that. And but yeah, the small wineries can have that real focus and lift it, and they usually do less grapes and do them kind of I'd say better.
And go out together, to Michaela's point. Go out as a group, because if you're as a group and you start to get listings in a market, then chances are you have a category on a wine list or a category in a high-end retail store, as opposed to being shelved with other wines with Bulgaria and whoever. So important. Yes, quality too.
And Glenn, you've been waiting patiently.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, it's Glenn from Black Hills Winery, and this is not exactly related to what Barbara's talking about, but more to DJ and to Janet, related to the judgment in BC. So one of my takeaways from the judgment in Paris in 1976 is that A, it put Napa on the world map, but it also dramatically increased the consumption of Napa wine in the USA. Americans now looked at Napa wine more seriously than they did before. So it's a watershed moment in regards to the acceptance of the wine and development of the region. And I think it's incredible the initiative we have for this judgment in BC, but I'm wondering if any thought was given to actually taking our best wines and going deep into enemy territory to hold the tasting, just like Stephen Spurrier did, taking Napa wine into Paris. So could we take the best Syrahs and go deep into the Rhone, or could we take our Pinots and go into Burgundy, or our left bank Bordeaux's to Bordeaux, or our right banks to Saint-Emilion? Like, would there be opportunity to maybe get a bigger bang for our media buck and more of that shock value if we took that tasting format to another region?
Mm-hmm. You know, it's a good idea, and as we grow and build and develop the judgment, I think that's a fantastic idea. It's also important to remember that the French demanded that it be in Paris, otherwise they wouldn't participate.
As opposed to in Bordeaux?
In the US, for example. Oh. Yes, it could not take place in the US. Otherwise, there would have been no judgment. The French insisted upon that. So it is, yeah, it's a great idea. I mean, things like this, for those of you, I think everyone, well, I hope everyone knows about the judgment. It's an important benchmarking of what we do, right? It's one of the most important things that young wine regions need is focus and confidence and introspection. And asking ourselves all the time, how are we doing? How are our wines? How do they stack up internationally? Go out and buy 10 Syrahs from around the world and taste your own wines. Do that with Pinot Grigio. Do that with Riesling. Knowledge is everything. And when you know what benchmarks are around the world, first of all, one of the great surprises is, wow, we look good. And that comes off time and time again in the global benchmark tastings that Rhys and Kurtis, and I've done a little bit of that as well. And it's very, very, it's humbling, it's prideful, but it also pushes you and challenges you, makes you aware. And that's the point of the judgment, is to have a look at what we're doing and have the courage and confidence to put a good set of wines up against global, commercial, successful benchmarks. Globally known, globally recognized, and see how we do. And if we don't do that well, that's okay, right? It just sort of captures a judging panel in a moment in time with a certain set of wines, and it's very, very meaningful, and it's courageous and important to do. And it was an absolute paradigm shift for California wines, for Napa in particular. I think what we need to do more of is show the consumers what we're doing, right? And we need to have follow-through tastings with those wines for consumer groups, because I think that will excite them and interest them, right? And you know, I really believe that we have parallel universes, multiple parallel universes when it comes to BC wine, and that's okay. We just have to make sure that that one universe that is taking the message to market is the right one, a focused one, and a united one. Because we always have wine consumers who go, and this is the most important point on my consumer list, and I failed to mention it, and that is price. Price, 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 all the time. That matters to them, and they tend to want to go to the lower end of our well-priced BC spectrum in general. So we need to recognize that that is a reality in the BC market, and it's okay to make wines for that. But it's also important to understand the kind of wines that we need to be the bellwethers for us.
On that note, and maybe even on a smaller scale than a big judgment or something like that, but just the opportunities of entering international competitions, magazines, it always makes for great press releases and so on when we do well at Decanter and so on. I think back to before I was into wine, before I cared anything about wine, but I knew at the time in 1994 that the Mission Hill 1992 Chardonnay won Best Chardonnay at the International Wine and Spirit Competition in London. That was literally front page news around, and that certainly instilled a lot of local consumer confidence. And this is where, to what Rhys was saying about not saying you have to pull out your vines and replant with a cohesive message, but to Janet's point as well, if we are looking at, I think what a lot of people would agree to be around the realm of Riesling, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Syrah as say our main four, and if we want to get known for specific styles, maybe when there are BCWI consolidations to enter international competitions and that sort of thing, we're not throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, that we kind of hone down on these specific varieties and styles, so that these are the ones that are constantly garnering attention, and then the rest of it follows.
If I could just add, I think that's a great idea, Glenn, to take something like the judgment on the road. I'm not sure if I would go to like the Rhone or where it was. I think we need to go to the key centers where the key influencers are. So kind of like whatever Eduardo Chadwick was doing, like go to London, go to Hong Kong, Berlin, go to the center where the influencers are and have that kind of tasting there, or replicate that tasting there. I think also one of the things about the Judgment of Paris and why it caught the attention of the US consumer is because Time magazine was there and wrote it up, and it wasn't a wine magazine, it was a general mainstream publication that everyone read, and your average person who may or may not have been drinking wine at the time, or had whatever perception they had of a Napa wine or California wine at the time, I mean, that's I think why it resonated with the American consumer, because it was in Time magazine. So has anyone invited Time to this year's judgment?
I think also ensuring
make a quick call.
Ensuring a follow through as well when there are international initiatives. I know, having been involved in some, because the thing is, people like our wines. The most important part is the quality, and the good thing is we have that. So that's kind of done and dusted. But having that, okay, great, we love your wines, can we get them? So, having that follow through and kind of that long-term vision of what comes next. It's not the be-all, end-all.
Yeah, if you're going to commit to export for whatever reason you do it, you have to follow up, you have to go to market time and time again, and that's something I've seen since I've been doing my job and talking to wineries, that you can't go to one tasting or one trade show and expect everyone to find a distributor. Or, I mean, to Kurtis's point, yes, people love your wine, but you have to go back to market like you do here. You come to Vancouver all the time so the trade can taste your wine. Yeah, well, it's hard having a winery and
yes, sir.
Hello, I just wanted to ask the panel if they've seen any legislation changes that have helped the bottom end in terms of farming, in terms of labor. As most of you know, the BC wine industry has seen challenges when it comes to labor. And now I'm part of a growing vineyard family, and planting 11 acres next year has exploded. Our first planting back in 2004 was approximate land value of $38,000 to $42,000, and we're now above $200,000 an acre. And I've heard a lot of suggestions about varietals, tearing out varieties, these sorts of things. But the challenge that we have is that we can't get the varietals that we want, and we need to pay bills that we can't pay with varieties that we're waiting 5 to 6 years on custom grafts because of legislation holding us back, taxation, and now labor. And we're now in a winery that's 35,000 cases, and we're preparing to make the next step with our next 10-year plan, but it's provided to be legal loophole after legal loophole. And this next vineyard of mine, I'd love to be able to plant something, but I'm basically forced to plant Pinot Gris because that's the only thing I can get. And my mortgage will cost me about, $100,000 a year. And that's meeting the next growth within the wine industry. So I just wanted to put it to the panel and just say, is there anything that you've seen internationally that's helped the bottom end facilitate the changes that you're talking about to not only grow the reputation, but handle, I guess, the focus that Rhys and that DJ had talked about?
And everybody, because I think this is an interesting one, I want to make sure all producers heard the question about the possibility of changing legislation, or have we seen that internationally to make it easier through access to labor, access to planting material, easier to change over or to work from the vineyard point of view?
I don't know, it sounds like a political question
Yeah.
that we have no expertise on, so yeah, it's
I think
vote in the right people.
the only thing we might
Miles,
say.
can comment?
What's that?
I just asked Rhys about the seasonal agricultural worker program because he has a vineyard as well, and I thought maybe he'd used it and he could suggest something.
We haven't ourselves, but there are certain programs. I'm sure you've looked into those, right? About, there's a lot of workers coming in from Mexico now, and many farms who've had the same groups coming back for 10, 15 years, but there's still labor shortages from what I understand, and that's the same in restaurant industries and everything. And you look at I was in Australia in November listening to a vineyard person talk, and the average wage for a vineyard worker in Australia is about $28 an hour. So and they're still selling the wine at the same price we are. So if that's where we have to go to get labor, then that's what you got to do. And you look at the precision with how they're growing grapes there. They'll time to the day when they shoot thin, because if it's this tall, it will cost more than if it's this tall or whatever, right? Like they know that, they have to save every cent, and it's become so precise because they have to pay such high rates just to get anyone out there. And that's maybe where we're going, so.
And I don't know anything about this at all, except that internationally, it's not easy to change vineyards. I mean, you have appellation law that restricts in the first place, in most places, what you can plant. And also, certainly in Europe, they've strictly monitored and reduced the amount of vineyards that are allowed to be planted. So I don't know that there's a precedent internationally to make it easier.
Thank you. Hi, my question, I guess, is more to DJ and Janet, because we export to Asia and Europe. So one typical question we have always, the wine tastes good, they are very distinctive, but why they are so expensive? So that's in compare with the European wines, Australian wines, and also Ontario wines. So I have been asking these questions, wineries both in BC and Ontario. So the typical good answer was the yield here, especially Okanagan, is lower than other regions. Then there's other reasons, like the labor cost is higher, then wineries are smaller, newer, more financial cost, more financing cost, because with newer wineries, they're still paying mortgage. But obviously, you can tell this to the traders, but these messages, they're not suitable going to consumer. Say, okay, why you pay more? So I just don't know why, maybe DJ or Janet can help. What's the best message to give to consumers? Why our wines are more expensive? Yes, the quality is there, but why compare with, all the wines internationally?
Well, if I'll start. I think you're right. I mean, you've sort of answered the question that land and labor and economies of scale all factor into the price of BC wine. But I think Also in my experience and what we've seen in my day job in the department is, and it's common to all new exporters, I think there's a lack of familiarity with how to price your wine when you go to market. For those of you who sell to the LDB or whatever they're now called, would be more familiar with ex-seller pricing and sort of tax-free FOB pricing, and that's the way you have to price your wine when you sell it internationally. So you're looking at selling it for about 50 to 55% of retail, because once it gets to that market and lands, and whoever touches it there, the importer, distributor, and then by the time it gets on a restaurant wine list or a retail store, there's like a whole series of markups that are happening. So if you are selling your wine at full retail price or just taking off the HST and the bottle deposit and then exporting it, by the time it's in an international market, it is very high priced. And we saw this in 2010. We brought a group of distributors and sommeliers from Chicago to British Columbia, and they visited lots of wineries, thought the wine was great, beautiful. But when they started talking to the wineries about the pricing structure of their wine, it was very clear that wineries didn't understand how to back out all these things, the LDB markup, all the taxes that you need to back out. And the example that Alpana Singh, she now owns her own restaurants in Chicago, she's a master sommelier, she said, you know, if I buy a BC wine if you're going to sell it to me for full retail at $45, by the time it comes into the US and goes through the 3-tier system through a importer and distributor and gets on my wine list and it's marked up, it's going to be selling for about $200 a bottle. And at that price point, if it's a Pinot Noir from BC, which again, in the Chicago market, the average consumer might not have heard of BC or the Okanagan. That wine is sitting in the same price point as, you know, really high-end, interesting Burgundy. So her point was, you have to know how to price your wine if you want to get into the market. And then, if you have that commitment and your wine is well priced, you also have to equip the som or the retailer with that story, because they're still going to have to convince someone why they would buy a BC Pinot Noir over, you know, a Llack, whatever, Burgundy or something like that.
Maybe, Barb, maybe you could give us an example of like a European wine that's $30 on the shelf here. What does the winery take home to get it here for $30?
Oh, so
roughly.
It's going to be a sobering moment.
€4?
€4. So $6, not even, right?
$6
for a $30 wine, we're taking what, 26 on that or something? 22 as a winery to sell that wine here, and the European wine's getting 5 or 6. So that's where you got to go if you want to be on the shelf at the same price you are here.
So you have to have a bit of a loss leader mentality for those wines. But the other thing that I always do is just, again, draw the Burgundy reference. We're small, we're tiny, we're precious, we're a drop in the global wine bucket. You know, we make 4 to 5 million cases per year of the 2.78 billion cases of wine made around the world each year. So, you know, there will be people who will always want to try that $200 BC wine, and that's a beautiful thing. I've been traveling in the US 10 years ago. I remember going into Fleming's Steakhouse, and a Soyuz La Rose was on the wine list. And I pretended I knew nothing about it, and I ordered it, and the Somm, bless their heart, knew all the facts and details and story behind a Soyuz La Rose. So I agree so much that the follow-through matters, but we're tiny, we're precious, we're rare. And
that's where we need that collective message. So we're known for this and this and this and this, and then people will look for that, right?
Absolutely, and I think it's interesting, this question of value, because there's value at all price points. And I think it is a little bit about watching what your ex-seller price is, figuring out what your ex-seller price is, that such a thing exists, but also realizing it's going to be expensive when it hits other markets. It's expensive here. Kurtis brought up an excellent point, though, about value and about how really the BC wines, the fine BC wines, quality wines, are better value than they ever have been in this market. We're moving. I'm sorting out a bunch of old newspaper clippings and everything, all my friends who have been written up about since sort of the early 2000s, sort of going through and shredding stuff. But but two interesting things I found yesterday. One was newspaper clipping from 2003, which was what can you get in Vancouver real estate wise for $125,000, $250,000, and $500,000. Very interesting, and quite different from what the situation is in 2018. And in my friends who had written articles and been featured in articles about BC wine, the prices were about the same. And that was 15 years ago. So look at what real estate has done. What do you get for $125,000? Well, you can't get anything. But, a good bottle of Pinot Noir from the Okanagan in 2003 was $22. Right? And that's not, that really hasn't changed that much. So I think that part of the market has corrected itself, and we don't talk that much about it, actually. And
the wines have improved too.
And at the same time,
you're getting better value for the money there.
Definitely.
And I think just going back to what Janet said, and yeah, the wine's going to be expensive somewhere else. It goes back to putting your best wines forward. If your wine is going to be $200, you've got to look at the quality of that, because you can get the person maybe to try it once, but the wine has to deliver at whatever price point it is, right? So putting those wines forward and maybe making them your loss leaders for the export market, it's a hopefully small percentage of what you're making.
And a big return.
But exactly, for reputation and renown.
Of course.
It's something I've always been curious about, and something that I think maybe you can answer. Early in my wine career, I was in New Zealand, Australia. I don't travel a lot, but I visited France and Italy, and I noticed in all their wine shops, they only carry the local wine. You pretty much can't buy a French wine in most New Zealand wine shops, so maybe they have one. Australia is pretty much Australian wine. When I was in Italy, they didn't have anything from France, and when I was in France, they didn't have much from Italy. Is that somewhere where you think we're going, especially what you were saying, Kurtis, earlier, about where we started, where we didn't have anything, and now at least people don't leave when they find out that we're selling BC wine. So I was just wondering what our market depth is.
I don't think that we're going there. Selfishly, I wouldn't want to. I think that's one of the things as a wine enthusiast in this market, that we do have access to this broad range. There certainly wouldn't be, or we're not at a point now where there is that demand, but I think that also that benefit of, like I said, one of the things of having a local industry, it's ensure that we have a very savvy market here. Also, the International Wine Festival has been a big influence on that as well, and so we have a market, I think, that is accustomed to having this broad range of wines at our disposal, and I think that that's also an important thing for our local industry, that people can go to Italy, they can go to France, and so on, and so we have to make sure our game is up there. And so I don't think we're going there, because also we want Barb to keep her job as a European wine buyer. No, I think that it's a benefit overall to kind of have this balance here in the world, and I think that we can't take for granted the market share that we do have of how much BC wine we are selling locally.
And it's only like 20% of the market anyway, right? So we don't have the capacity to be like those countries. they're like, you talk like Australia, New Zealand, they're export countries, Chile, like their local demand is so much lower than their production, where we're the opposite here, right? So it's a kind of a different framework.
Sorry, I was more, just to further the question, I was more wondering what the depth is, not that we would be exactly like those countries. I think there's always some sort of international.
I think certainly the consumer acceptance, like at my first job in a winery, like trying to pour wine, people wouldn't even try red wines from BC, and I'm not that old. Like, you know, they wouldn't even taste them. Like, we can do whites, we can't even do reds. You never hear that nowadays, right? And like Kurtis saying, you know, like Vancouver restaurants never would list BC wines, or very rarely back in the day, and then when you started there, right? And then now they're all proud to have a huge selection of BC wine, and the consumers are flooding to the Okanagan to bit. Like, I think it's you know, moving so far in that direction, I think is what you.
And I actually think the healthiest thing is that there's this circumstance where Kurtis talks about where it was all BC wine and people didn't want it, and then people demanded to have a BC wine on the list, and if there wasn't, if you know, European-style restaurants open up without BC wine, and there was, you know, outrage against that, and now we've sort of reached this happy, mature place where you can have wine lists that match the food, and maybe that's regional, and maybe that's European, and you have others that have a mix, and you have others that are BC, and that to me is a healthy wine market. Don, I think we have one last question to wrap it up.
Want to ask the panel, delighted to have you all here and with such a broad experience of the industry and the length of time in the industry.
Sorry, who are you?
Want to ask you to put on your crystal ball for a minute. You know, we hear of growers who are thinking about planting, or as a vigneron, planting, we're thinking 10 and 15 years ahead, and 20 years in terms of making decisions for our land. If we're going to get investment, we have to understand the terroir. We have to try and do what's right for the market as well. Well, the real challenge is, what's the market 20 years from now? We've seen, as an example, all of us have seen in the last 10 years, the explosion of rosé wine. It's up to something like 35% of consumption in France now. Where is the market going? If you could share any insights with us, nuances of, I heard one comment, more wood, less wood in certain markets, but share your thoughts with us, because that's where we're trying to think. Thank you.
Let's start with Janet and go across. Perfect way to finish.
Yeah, so this is based on sort of what I've been tasting and what I've been hearing from international trade and media and my colleagues as well. For BC, I think the things that shine here, and again, it's, you know, North, Middle, South Okanagan, the islands, different Similkameen, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but I think Riesling is great for many parts, sort of Middle and North Okanagan. Syrah in the south and in the Similkameen. I know Syrah is very hard to sell, but I think it's...
but Riesling's a breeze, right?
Yeah, Riesling's a breeze. But I think we have to look at it from the perspective of, you know, whatever. I don't know, you know, what consumers, because I don't do consumer research, but I think we have to look at it as an opportunity and a challenge that if it is a grape that does so well in the Okanagan, how do we get behind that and how do we build that into the story? I think sparkling wine is something, and I also, for another red grape variety, which is less specific to, and this is more Okanagan, Similkameen, because the other regions are a bit different, but I think Cab Franc is a grape variety that outside of the Loire in France, nobody else grows it. They grow a lot in Ontario, they grow a significant amount here. It's beautiful, it ripens more easily than Cab Sauvignon. I think we could, and winemakers in BC have told me that we could own that grape internationally.
Awesome. Michaela?
Yeah, I think we can make, or well, we could pretend to make predictions about what's going to happen 10 to 20 years from now. We simply, it's impossible. Who knew that rosé was going to be such a big explosion, or Prosecco? So I always, I'm a bit skeptical or a little bit reticent about chasing what's going to be the next big thing, and rather focusing on what we can do best. And I think that that's really the key for where BC is at right now, because I think that's what's going to drive our industry. If we truly can make the best quality wines with, you know, the select number of grapes or styles or what it is, and get known for something, I think that's far more important than chasing the next big thing. I agree with some of the comments that were made earlier, let's say about not overwhelming the wines with oak and really showing what our identity is. I think people also are very health conscious and very conscious about, and this is maybe sort of an echelon of consumer, but being health conscious and about being very conscious about people's practices. And I just think people, maybe I'm optimistic here, but people becoming more and more concerned about things being ethical and things being appropriate for the sustainability of the environment. And to me, those are things that I would focus on and put into the messaging. We can do it here, and we're blessed for that.
Thank you. DJ.
So I have two minds, again, my parallel universes, and I think the focusing on the grapes that really seem to be stellar here, and especially competitively stellar in the world, Syrah, Cabernet, Riesling, Chardonnay, the sparkling style, I think that's very important. But I think we can't forsake something that is real and special here, and that is our diversity. Yes, we have 80 grapes, and that's too many, but I know and I fully believe that consumers love variety and diversity, and we have, you know, one of the last outposts of Ehrenfelser, and we have Petit Milot, and we have these crazy, wonderful little grapes that are turned into really characterful wines, and we shouldn't necessarily lose those, especially since they have so much support from the local market. So I think it's a balancing act of doing some of the more esoteric things that we do here, and they don't have to go to market. They don't have to be part of our big story, but there's no reason why we should gratuitously stop making those wines. But to sustain that, we have to focus on a united and simpler message globally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think at the scale we're at, we do have that benefit where there aren't 100 million cases being made, nor will there be. So as much as there are those kind of trends that come and go, there will be some producers that kind of dovetail into them, and then, you know, but as long as we are doing what's true and authentic here and what we do best, you know, it's funny, there is of course the sparkling thing, the pink thing, but I think, you know, Rhys has brought up a few times just in the past that it's also an interesting time in wine because you have this, you know, runaway success of these, you know, highly manufactured, really sweet, over-extracted California red, heinous wines with lots of, you know, RS and everything, and yet at the same time you have this natural wine movement that's, you know, become big on its own scale over the last few years, and so they're like two completely different roads. So, you know, different people will kind of, you know, hit their stride with things at the right time, but if we are focusing on the proper varieties, and particular, you know, what does well in which place, that's most important. And on Michaela's note, I would think, if I like crystal ball, I would like to think that also sustainability and organic will be more important. I think we're still at the point where I don't think there's many people at all in our market that specifically shop for it in wine, for food they do. Yeah. But I think it's a nice bonus if something is that way, but I would think, especially here, West Coast and all that, in the next 10 years, I think that more recognition that wine is food and that organic and so on is important.
Yeah, well said, Rhys.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it's been said, but you know, I think we're in a pretty lucky place as a wine region, because what we naturally get in wines is this freshness and elegance and good acidity and vibrancy and liveliness in our wine that a lot of other countries, to be honest, would die to have naturally. And half the time we're just obliterating that with overdoing it, over oaking, over extraction, over ripe, and the wines taste like, it's been brought up a number of times, like they're from nowhere. It could be anywhere in the world, right? And so we're giving up what we naturally have. And the world is actually slowly moving into lighter, fresher, crisper styles. You talked about London and other parts of the world, right? To me, this west coast of North America is the last holdout of big, and the rest of the world's already changed. Australia's changed, you know, Europe, UK, you know, it's all already changed, right? So we're lucky we have this ability to make these wines easily. That's what we do. It's our time, and you know, we've got to focus on that, I think. So it's not just about grapes, but about styles. And one way to look at what are the best grapes and styles for me is, don't look at our best wines, because you know, there's some great talented people who can make amazing wines with every grape, but look at the bottom end. What, you know, of the lowest end, which is the highest quality, right? So you rarely get a bad Riesling or a bad Chardonnay or a bad Pinot Gris, but do you get bad Bordeaux blends and things like that? Yes, you know, that are astringent, and you know, so focus on what, even when it's at the lowest, you know, the kind of the worst version is still pretty good, and then the top end of that's going to be really high as well. So you know, those that are up here, not kind of like this, right? If that makes sense. I think that's something. That's how we know what we do best. It's not the ones where you have to work so hard to make a great wine on. It's the wines that naturally make a good wine easily, given our climate, and start from there. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much, panel, for bringing all of your expertise and your knowledge and concisely and frankly sharing those ideas. And thank you for your questions. Producers, I hope that this is the beginning of many dialogues like this, because I think it's super interesting. And thank you very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you very much, panel and Barb. That was a fantastic discussion. It really was. And a lot of what I heard today, it's been recorded, by the way, so you're responsible for what you said. No, it's been recorded because it's really important to share this with industry. I can tell you that the BC Wine Institute is just about to embark on a long-term strategic plan for this industry, and it's been a number of years since we've done that. I've been with the Institute for close to 8 years now, and not over my watch have we done this. So it's been so reactionary as the industry's just been growing so significantly. We're actually going to take some time, do some planning, get input from members, not just from BC Wine Institute members, but from the trade and from the media, and we really want to take a deep dive and take a look at where we want to be in 10, 15, 20 years and how we're going to chart that course. So we're just underway with that process. You'll hear a lot more of that in the next couple of months, but please make sure that you're engaged, because we look forward to that opportunity, and you can't get there if you don't know where you're going. So again, a round of applause for everyone on the panel and for you for attending. Thank you. Thank you very much.